Hello and welcome to the Following Truth Bible study on YouTube. As always, I am your host LJ. In this video, we're going to be looking at, did Jesus break the law? It's a common accusation against Jesus. Sometimes it's made by non-believers, but it's also used by certain Christians and also by Jews that if Jesus existed, if he was, as history depicts him, is being a preacher in Israel, and there's obviously many non-Christians and obviously atheists would disagree with the whole Messiah thing, and the Jews would obviously disagree with that. But if Jesus is that person and he went around doing things in Israel at that time, it's sometimes used that Jesus broke the law. And so if he broke the law, he couldn't actually be the Messiah anyway. Hello, Doki. Thank you very much for being here. Hello, Dennis. I'm glad you're here as well. So this video is basically, it was in the last video that I did, it was a comment that was brought up by somebody, Tong Ji, who is a regular. I'm not sure if he's here, or if he's going to watch this video live, or maybe in playback. He's in America, so the time difference is a bit strange over there, so it may not be something he's able to watch live, but hopefully he'll be able to watch this back on playback. But it was one of the questions that was brought up, and was that, did Jesus break the law? Now, he specifically referred to the casting out of the money changers, the buyers and the sellers, and Jesus in the temple. So that's we're going to look at that, but also I'm going to look at, did Jesus break the Sabbath as well, which is another common accusation against Jesus, that he actually broke the Sabbath. And if I've got time, we might touch on leprosy and stuff of touching lepers. But really, once we've gone through these, the leprosy one kind of answers itself anyway. But I'm going to look specifically at these two. So I want to look at the money. Why did Jesus cast out the money changers from the temple? And also, did Jesus break the Sabbath? Now, there are many occasions where Jesus was accused of breaking the Sabbath. And then there's also another occasion that I'm going to show. Actually, there's a bit of misunderstanding when it comes to one of these times that Jesus was meant to have broken the Sabbath. But I'm going to start with the money changers and why Jesus actually cast out the money changers. So again, I've got some slides, and hopefully they're all in order. As always, I'm not going to promise anything, because for some reason I'm not really very good at it, and I keep missing out slides. So hopefully we've got as many as I need, but if not, I'll just bring up the verse or something, a picture, if that's what needs to be brought up. So we're going to start with casting out the money changers. Why did Jesus cast out the money changers? So the story of Jesus casting out the money changers and those that bought and sold from the temple is a very famous biblical story. However, what many people do not realize is that Jesus actually did this twice. He did it once at the beginning of his ministry, which is recorded in the Gospel of John, chapter 2. And if I bring that up. Hopefully my internet seems to be crashing again, but I shall wait just to see whether this kicks in or whether I need to. There, it kicked back in. Luckily, again, not as usual, if my internet does crash out, it only takes a minute or so for me to come back. And I do apologize about that, but I am still working on that. But if it does happen, I will only be gone a minute once I've realized that it needs to be rebooted. So in John 2:13, and the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves and the changers of money sitting. And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overthrew the tables, and said unto them that sold doves, Take these things hence, make not my Father's house an house of merchandise. But Jesus also did this again near the end of his ministry, just before he eventually was crucified. This is recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So Matthew 21:12. And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves, and said unto them, It is written, My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. And then also recorded in Mark. I won't bother to read that, but that's the same story as we have in the Gospel of Mark, and then also in the Gospel of Luke. I'll read that one because it's a little bit shorter. And he went into the temple and began to cast out them that sold therein, and them that bought, saying unto them, It is written, My house is the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. Now, this is sometimes, and I believe mistakenly, used as a contradiction between the Gospel of John and the other three Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, that the recording in John is in the wrong place. I actually believe that there are two occurrences of this, and that's why John records one and the Synoptic Gospels record another. But I mean, it's not. Even if John does put this in the wrong place, I don't think that it's not pertinent to this particular subject. What it is, that would be shown whether the Bible is accurate or not. But I actually do believe that there are two occurrences. But like I say, we're not going to focus specifically on that. But I do believe that if there are two incidences, then obviously then there is no contradiction at all. John records one, the Synoptic Gospels record another. And I do think that there are differences between the recordings which show that there are two different occurrences of this same event. Now, some people claim that the money changers, these buyers and sellers, were actually doing what was lawful for them to do, and that Jesus was actually incorrect in clearing the temple. And so he broke the law by stopping what was being done lawfully in the temple. And those that assert this would normally go to Deuteronomy in order to prove that this was allowed. So Deuteronomy 14:24, And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from thee, which the Lord thy God, and my internet seems to be crashing again. Hopefully it will reconnect. Let me just see. Let me bear me one second while hopefully this is reconnecting and won't need to be. Not sure if this is. If anybody is in the chat, would you be able to just let me know whether this is still live, whether you can still hear me, or whether I need to reboot? Do apologize for this. Okay, seems like it's reconnected anyway. Anyway, so yeah, Deuteronomy 14:24. And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from thee, which the Lord thy God shall choose to set his name there, when the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, then shalt thou turn it into money, and bind up the money in thine hand, and shalt go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose, and thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, for oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, or for whatsoever thy soul desireth. And thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thine household. So what it's showing, what this is meant to show, is that it was perfectly legal for them to be spying and selling these animals, because they were if the Israelites, if the place was too far, if the temple was too far for them, they were able to sell their things that they had back in their own land, or the part of the land that was theirs. They could sell that for money. Then they could travel to the temple, and then they could buy what they needed at the temple with the money that they received. And so these people that were buying and selling in the temple, it is argued that these were doing this legally. And so as they were doing it legally, Jesus was wrong to drive them out. But the problem with this is that we only need to go back 2 verses in Deuteronomy to prove this actually false. In Deuteronomy 14:22. And we'll see, thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed, that thou field bringeth forth year by year. And thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of thy corn, of thy wine, and thy oil, and thy firstlings of thy herds and the flocks, and they mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. This was actually in relation to tithing, and it's got nothing to do with the situation that Jesus was in when he cast these buyers and sellers out. They were not meant to be in the temple buying and selling. There was nothing stated that they should have been in the temple buying and selling these animals. And it had nothing to do with the actual feast that Jesus was in relation to at the time, because this was specific to the tithe. But both of the occurrences of Jesus cleansing the temple happened just before the Passover. Right? This was a totally different time than what was being permitted for this back in Deuteronomy. And it also wasn't allowed to be done within the temple itself. There was no need for them to be in the temple. But this is within the Passover. And the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves and the changers of money sitting. Now, on the second occurrence, we see that it was 6 days before the Passover that Jesus went to Bethany, where he rose Lazarus from the dead. John 12:1. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Jesus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. Now, the next day, Jesus entered into Jerusalem. This is the triumphal entry. And on the next day, much people that were come to the feast, so this is the Passover, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they were in Jerusalem now for the feast of the Passover, which is not what was described back in Deuteronomy. So this is also depicted in Matthew 21, Mark 11, and Luke 19. And these are the same chapters as Jesus cleansing the temple. There is no command for the money changers, buyers or sellers, to be operating at the time of the Passover. Hey, Tongji, glad that you could be here. Hopefully, I'm not sure whether you've missed when you've come in. I don't know what you've actually seen, whether you've missed any of this. But obviously, I'm trying to go through the breaking of the law when Jesus was meant to have cast out these buyers and sellers, and trying to explain right now why the casting out of the buyers and the sellers was not actually unlawful for Jesus to actually do. So quick recap, just in case you haven't seen, for everybody that may have just come in. So Jesus is obviously gone to the temple, and this was on the Passover. So he's come to the Passover at the temple, and that's when he's cast these people out. And there was no commandment at the Passover for the buyers and sellers to be operating, buying and selling these animals. And there certainly is no commandment. There's nothing in the law that allowed the buyers and sellers to be in the temple itself, where the people would come and they would buy these animals, because what they were doing. If you go back and you'll see in the first 10 minutes, but there's no law here that allowed these to buy the buying and selling to be done within the temple, and there's no stipulation for this to be done at the Passover. What you'll see in a moment, they were not doing what was lawful for them to do. So it's the people, the buyers and sellers, are the ones that were not doing what was lawful for them to do. There's no law that allowed and stipulated for them to do this. So Jesus was in fact correct to clear them from the temple. But notice that Jesus drove out those, and we get specifically what we're told, and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves and the changers of money sitting. This is important. All of these animals, right, the oxen, the sheep, and the doves, these were for sacrifices and burnt offerings. That's what these animals were used for. And so if we go to, you'll see here, Exodus 20:24, and an altar of earth thou shalt make unto me, and shalt sacrifice thereupon thy burnt offerings and thy peace offerings, thy sheep and thine oxen. In all places where I record my name, I will come unto thee, and I will bless thee. and in Leviticus, and if the burnt sacrifice for his offering to the Lord be of fowls, then he should bring his offering turtle doves or young pigeons. Leviticus 5:7, and if he be not able to bring a lamb, then he shall bring for the trespass which he had committed 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons unto the Lord for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering. Leviticus 14:22. And 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, such as he is able to get. And the one shall be a sin offering, and the other a burnt offering. Now you see, all of these animals were in relation to sacrifice for sin or burnt offerings, not in relation to the Passover, which is when these occurrences of Jesus chucking the money changers out of the temple. That was at Passover. Now, the Passover is a completely different thing than these burnt sacrifices. The Passover was a lamb. And so all of these people that were selling these animals were not doing so in accordance to the Passover law. And again, there's no law that would allow them to do this inside the temple. So those that were selling the animals were doing so for people to buy in order to offer sacrifices for sins and burnt offerings. And this leads us to this. So this is important. These sin offerings, these sin animals. And then we get a spiritual meaning behind this as well. And so this leads us now to the spiritual meaning of what this casting out of the money changers was. So firstly, we get a right to do so because they weren't doing so in accordance to what they were meant to be doing by law, what they were meant to be buying and selling at the time that they were meant to be buying and selling, and in the place that they were meant to be buying and selling it. The temple wasn't meant to be used for that. And that's why he said, my home is for the prayer, not for this den of thieves. You're buying and selling animals. The spiritual meaning is often completely overlooked or totally missed, although there is spiritual meaning behind everything that Jesus said and did. Now, Jesus in his rebuking makes 2 very important statements that when we understood, when they're understood, we give us a lot of information. And he taught, so this is Mark 11:17, and he taught, saying unto them, is it not written, my house shall be called of all nations the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. Now, the first statement, is it not written? That's where he states, and he taught and said, is it not written, my house shall be? And this is found back in Isaiah 56:7, back in the Old Testament. Even them I will bring to my holy mountain, right, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon my altar. For mine house shall be called an house of prayer for all people. Now, again, look at this in reference to the burnt offerings, because this is now going to give you the spiritual meaning of this. So we now have the house of prayer, and the sacrifices shall be accepted upon mine altar. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices. Now, if we go back, so, and it also refers to all people, right? The offerings shall be accepted upon the altar. If we go back and look at the context of this verse, we will see that the stranger will not be cut off. So the stranger, in Isaiah 56:3, neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, hey, I'm biased, glad that you can be here. I am actually normally talk about your channel on here, so I try and send people to your channel as well. But glad you can be here rather than me coming to yours. But so yeah, so this is what we'll see here is neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, the Lord hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. And in Isaiah 56:5, even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place and a name better. So this is the stranger than the sons of daughters, or sons and of daughters. So he's saying that the strangers will have a better place, a better name than the sons and the daughters. I will give them an everlasting name, that they shall not be cut off. Also, the sons of the stranger that join themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, every one that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it and taketh hold of my covenant. Now, if we look at verse 1, we will see that we are even given a time frame for this. Thus saith the Lord, keep ye judgment and do justice, for my salvation is near to come and my righteousness to be revealed. Jesus is that coming of the salvation of God. He is God's righteousness revealed, and he was bringing this to attention. Jesus was highlighting that the time of God's salvation had now come. The sacrifices and offerings of the stranger will be accepted. Jesus is that sacrifice and offering. It is through Jesus that all nations have been able to come to God, and by which all nations will now be accepted. 1 John 2:2. And he is the propitiation of all for our sins, but not for ours only, but also for the sins of the whole world. The second statement, but ye have made it a den of thieves, is found in Jeremiah 7. Is this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, even I have seen it, saith the Lord. God's house, the temple, had become a den of robbers. So again, we have to go back to the passage to get a full understanding of what Jesus was actually referring to. Now, in the chapter, we will see that God is calling the Jews to change their ways, to turn back to him, and would allow them to dwell in the land. The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, stand in the gate of the Lord's house, and proclaim there this word, and say, hear the word of the Lord, all ye of Judah, that enter in at the gates to worship the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. Amend your ways and your doings, and I will cause you to dwell in the place. Trust ye not in lying words. And I'm just going to stop a second. Hopefully, my internet is going to crash, but with a bit of luck, it will just kick back in, but we'll see. Right, it looks like it's coming back. Right. For if ye thoroughly amend your ways and your doings, if you thoroughly execute judgment between a man and his neighbor, if ye oppress not the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, and shed not innocent blood in this place, neither walk after other gods to your hurt, then I will cause you to dwell in the place, in the land that I give to your fathers forever and ever. God refers to the abominations that they were doing, what they were committing. Behold, ye trust in lying words that cannot profit. Will you steal, murder, and commit adultery, and swear falsely, and burn incense unto Baal, and walk after other gods, whom ye know not, and come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered to do all these abominations. And he tells them that he will cast them from his sight, as he had already done to Ephraim, the northern kingdom. Jeremiah 7:12. But go ye not now unto my place, which was in Shiloh, which I set my name at the first, and see what I did it for the wickedness of my people Israel. And now, because ye have done all these works, saith the Lord, I spake unto you, rising up early and speaking, but ye heard not. And I called you, but ye answered not. Therefore will I do unto this house, which is called by my name, wherefore ye trust, and unto the place which I gave to you and to your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh. And I will cast you out of my sight, as I have cast out the brethren, even the whole seed of Ephraim. Now we know that God did in fact cast the Jews from his sight because of their wickedness. The temple was destroyed and the Jews were dispersed from the land. So as we can see, this was to do with the sin, and as we have already seen, the Jews were in the temple selling the animals for sin sacrifices. Right? They weren't there selling for the Passover. They were there for selling sin sacrifices in the temple. They were making it a house of robbers, because that's not what God wanted. But we see in Jeremiah chapter 7 that God states that he did not command burnt offerings or sacrifices of the Israelites when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, put your burnt offerings unto your sacrifices, and eat flesh. For I spake not unto the fathers, nor commanded them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. The sin offerings were a later addition by God because of their transgressions and their sins. But God does not delight. He takes no pleasure in sin sacrifices, and neither did he require them. Psalm 46. Sacrifice and burnt and offerings thou did not desire. Mine ears hast thou opened. Burnt offering and sin offering you have not required. God didn't want this sin sacrifice. Above, when he said sacrifice and offering and burnt offerings and offerings for sin thou wouldest not, neither hadst pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. They were given in the law, but they were not wanted by God. He didn't want them to be sacrificing animals. He wanted them to not sin. But the Jews were they were sinning because they could just offer this sacrifice. Whereas the sacrifice was meant to be because of their sin, they were actually just using the sacrifice to allow them to sin. And so in the temple, they were buying and selling these sin sacrifices, and that was what was being referred to here. That's why Jesus casts them out, because it's sin sacrifices that they were buying and selling in the temple. The Jews were offering sin sacrifices instead of changing their ways. So not only did Jesus clear the temple of those who were unlawfully selling animals for sacrifices that God didn't even want, but only put into his law in order to actually allow them to kind of see their sin, and then rather than them have to die for their sin, that sacrifice could go to, or that death could go to an animal, which would allow them to kind of, not that they wouldn't have to be put to death. It was meant to be there as a kind of help for them for their sacrifice, and so that they weren't put to death, but they were using it just for the sake of doing so. And they were buying and selling in the temple, which was meant to be a house of prayer, not a house of buying and selling. But also, while he removed these animals, which were for sacrifice, there was spiritually, it shows the removal of those sacrifices. No longer would there be any more need for those selling of the animals for sacrifice. And there would be no more sacrifices made in the temple. Because Jesus was the sacrifice. Jesus was going to take over and be that sacrifice for sin. So he's removing the sin sacrifices from the temple, because no longer are you going to need these sin sacrifices. Through the destruction of the temple, it is now impossible to make sin sacrifices as per the law, because Jesus is now that sin sacrifice. He's taken away the sacrifice of the law, and both physically and spiritually. So okay, so yeah, I did get kicked out of my for a moment, and unfortunately, it has actually. Do apologize for this. I really do need to get this sorted. So let me just add these back to the. I really do need to get this sorted. So let me get back to where I need to be. So now Jesus and the Jesus and the breaking of the Sabbath. So now I'm gonna deal with that, but I just need to find Hebrews. Hebrews 10:8. There we go. Right. Okay. So what about, did Jesus break the Sabbath? Now this is actually, when it comes to Jesus and breaking the law, this is the main one that gets used, that Jesus actually broke the Sabbath law. And it's an accusation that is often used, and he is accused of breaking the Sabbath. But did he really break the Sabbath, as he is accused of? This is often the accusation made against Jesus by specifically non-Christians, but also Jews themselves. They would use this to demonstrate that Jesus was not the Messiah, and that he couldn't have been the Messiah, as he was a lawbreaker. There are actually even many Christians that accuse Jesus of breaking the Sabbath as well, and they will usually justify that by saying that Jesus was the Lord of the Sabbath, and he had a divine right to break the law because he was Lord over it, and he was not bound by it. And this we can find in Matthew 12:8. So, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. And so this is usually the way that it's kind of justified that Jesus could actually break the Sabbath. For those that, for Christians who do believe that Jesus did break the Sabbath, so they'll use this verse. But I don't believe that Jesus did break the Sabbath, and I don't believe that he broke the law at all. So in this study, obviously, this part of the study, we're going to look at some of the accusations against Jesus breaking the Sabbath. Now, importantly, in this part, we're going to look at did the disciples break the Sabbath. It's not even do we have to keep the Sabbath today. I don't actually believe that those in Christ have to keep the Sabbath today, but that isn't relevant specifically. I'm not also arguing, was Jesus accused of breaking the Sabbath by the Jews at his time? Jesus was most certainly accused of breaking the Sabbath by the Pharisees. In fact, that happened on numerous occasions. But accusations do not necessitate the breaking of the law. The Bible tells us that sin is the breaking of the law. Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. But as I showed in my last video, we have numerous biblical attestation that Jesus was sinless. So for 2 Corinthians 5:21, for he hath made him to be sin for us who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. Hebrews 4:15, for we have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted as we without sin. Hebrews 7:26, 1 Peter 2:21, 1 John 3:5, and you know that he was manifested to take away our sins, and in him was no sin. So we have biblical attestation that Jesus was without sin. Therefore, logically, we should be able to conclude that Jesus could not have broken the law or the Sabbath, or he would have been a sinner, which he was not, as the Bible clearly states. So why was Jesus accused of breaking the Sabbath if he actually didn't do it? It should be noted that every time that Jesus himself is accused of breaking the Sabbath, it is because he has healed somebody on the Sabbath. The Bible clearly depicts Jesus healing on the Sabbath. However, I will demonstrate that healing on the Sabbath is not breaking the Sabbath. In fact, it was perfectly legal to heal upon the Sabbath day. If it was illegal to heal on the Sabbath day, then Jesus healing on the Sabbath was not breaking the law. One of the incidents where Jesus is accused of breaking the Sabbath can be found in Matthew chapter 12, where Jesus heals a man who has a withered hand, which is also recorded in Mark chapter 3 and Luke chapter 6. Now, when we look at this accusation depicted in the Synoptic Gospels, we will see that a specific question was asked to Jesus by the Pharisees. The question asked was simply, was it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Matthew 12:9. And when he departed thence, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man which had his hand withered. And they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days? That they might accuse him. Now, it should not go unnoticed that the reason for asking this question is because they wanted to accuse Jesus. That was the reason for asking him this question. This was something that the Pharisees tried to do on many occasions. They wished to find fault in Jesus so that they could so that they could find fault and accuse him, and they could actually show that he wasn't the Messiah. But Jesus himself directly gives us the answer to this question. He clearly states that it was lawful to do well on the Sabbath. How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. Jesus himself literally states that it was lawful to do good on the Sabbath days. So the statement of Jesus in this verse should be enough to prove that Jesus didn't break the Sabbath at all. While he was accused of breaking the Sabbath by a healing upon it, Jesus literally states that it was actually lawful for him to do so. It was lawful to do good on the Sabbath day. Now, Jesus doesn't argue that he was breaking the Sabbath, right, or that he had some divine right to break the Sabbath, like some Christians will claim that that's what that meant. He was Lord of the Sabbath, so he had the right to do this. But rather, Jesus specifically stated that it was lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Now, the reason that Jesus could heal on the Sabbath was because it was, as Jesus himself stated, lawful to do so. So either Jesus lied, or we have to accept that regardless of our own understanding of the Sabbath laws, Jesus himself explained that doing good on the Sabbath was lawful. Jesus, therefore, did not break the Sabbath because doing good, healing, was permitted upon the Sabbath. If it was lawful to do good on the Sabbath, as Jesus stated, it was then not unlawful to do so. So let's have a look at why. We're going to look at that now. Who decides what work is on the Sabbath? No details are laid out. We are going to look at that. We're going to investigate what that actually means. So there are two reasons why it was lawful to heal on the Sabbath. Reason one, there is no law against doing good on the Sabbath. The Sabbath was first given to Israel to observe in Exodus 16. This was before the law was given through Moses to Israel. But the command here in Exodus 16 was only that they should rest and that they should not go out looking for manna on the Sabbath because double had been provided the day before. It is only later, with the giving of the 10 Commandments and the law of Moses, or the law given through Moses, that the Sabbath was given to Israel as part of this law. And this is found in Exodus chapter 20. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. Now, what is important here are the words labor and work in this law. Work, so labor is the Hebrew word abad, and it means to work, to serve. And the word translated as work, melakal, it just means occupation, your work. So here they were told, right, that they should carry out their work, their occupation for 6 days. But on the Sabbath, the 7th day, they should cease from that work, that occupation. And this is the Strong's Abad and also Melaka. In Exodus 23, 6 days shalt thou do thy work, and on the 7th day thou shalt rest, that thine ox and thine ass may rest, and the son of thine handmaid, and the stranger may be refreshed. This was about ceasing from work, right? The work that they did for those 6 days, so that they could get rest. And in all things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth. So the command is about ceasing from physical work, their job, their occupation that they did for a living upon the 7th day. It is this work that was unlawful to do upon the Sabbath day. They were to rest from their physical work. And that was the meaning of the Sabbath. The Pharisees had overburdened the Sabbath day, and actually the law in general, with traditions and rules. For ye laid men with burdens grievous to the born, and ye yourselves touch not that the burdens with one of your fingers. But the law, I have missed. No, I thought I missed a slide there, but I haven't, luckily. But the law of no work on the Sabbath was not absolute. It was not absolute. While the law stipulated no work was to be done upon the Sabbath, the law also outlined specific exceptions to the rule. The law itself allowed for priests to work upon the Sabbath. All male children were to be circumcised on the 8th day. And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Leviticus 12:3. The priests were to carry out their work of circumcising even if the child's 8th day fell on the Sabbath. The law of the 8th day circumcision was to be carried out regardless of the day that it fell upon. It's the 8th day. That law superseded the Sabbath law. It had to be done on the 8th day, regardless. And so it is included that that in the law, in the circumcision of the flesh, the priests were allowed to work on the 8th day. They were also allowed to offer sacrifice or offering on the Sabbath. Numbers 28:9. And on the Sabbath day, 2 lambs of the first year without spot, and 2/10 deals of flour for meat offering, mingled with oil, and the drink offering thereof. So the priests were allowed to work on the Sabbath, and it was specific in law. The priests working on the Sabbath day will actually become even more relevant when we look at another occasion that Jesus was accused of breaking the Sabbath. So we see clear attestation to we also see clear attestation to prophets working on the Sabbath. In 2 Kings chapter 4, we are told of the story of the prophet Elisha, where he raised a Shunammite woman's son from the dead. Okay. My internet hopefully is coming back. Right. Okay. So Elisha raises a Shunammite woman's son from the dead. After her son dies, she wants to go to Elisha for help to bring him back to life. But the father of the child asks, "Why would you go today?" As it was neither the new moon or the Sabbath, showing that prophets worked on the Sabbath day. 2 Kings 4:18. And when the child was grown, it fell on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said unto his father, my head. And he said to the lad, carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat her on his knees till noon. and then died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door upon him, and went out. And she called unto her husband, and said, Send me, I pray thee, one of the young men, and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God, and come again. And he said, Wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, It will be well. So this showed that Elisha, who was a prophet, worked on the Sabbath. And in fact, actually, that's when people thought that they actually worked. They worked on the Sabbath. That was why he said, you can't go today because it's not the new moon or a Sabbath. So the prophets worked on the Sabbath, and Jesus was a prophet. Now, in John 5, Jesus stated that his Father was always working, and so was he. But Jesus answered them, My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. This was again after the Jews had wanted to persecute Jesus after he had healed on the Sabbath. And therefore the Jews persecute Jesus and so to slay him because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. So he'd healed somebody on the Sabbath again. The priests and the prophets were doing the work of God. And they were doing this on the Sabbath because it was allowed for those that were working for God to work upon the Sabbath, just as Jesus was doing. He was working for God. But this wasn't physical work. This wasn't the work of the job that they had. This was God's work. And God is always working. And so God's people are allowed to work, even on the Sabbath, because even God works upon the Sabbath. Good is always allowed. And as we know, it was God, it was the Father that was doing the works through Jesus. Believe thou not that I am in the Father, and the Father in me. The words that I speak unto you, I speak not of myself, but the Father that dwelleth in me. He does the works. And this leads us into reason 2. In his answer to the Pharisees, Jesus asked a question of them. Again, answering their question with a question of his own was something that Jesus often did. And he said unto them, What man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into the pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold of it and lift it out? How much, this is where Jesus talks about that it's lawful. How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore is it lawful to do well on the Sabbath days? Because he's now saying that which one of you would not, if a sheep fell into a ditch on the Sabbath day, which one of you would not help that sheep? But then he says, how much better is a man than a sheep? So if it's okay for you to help a sheep, how much more is it to help a man on the Sabbath day? It's lawful because it was lawful to help a sheep. And Jesus is actually appealing to the law in order to demonstrate that it was in fact lawful to do that on the Sabbath day. It is actually stipulated in the law that if you saw a neighbor's animal in trouble, that you were actually meant to help that animal in Deuteronomy 22:1. Thou shalt not see thy brother's ox or his sheep go astray, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt in any case bring them unto your brother. And if thy brother be not nigh unto thee, or if you know not him not, then thou shalt bring it unto thine own house, and it shall be with thee until thy brother seek after it, and thou shalt restore it to him again. In like manner shalt thou do with his ass, and so shalt do with his raiment, and with all lost things of your brother, which he has lost, and thou hast found, shalt thou do likewise. Thou mayest not hide thyself. Thou shalt not see thy brother's ass or his ox fall down by the way, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt surely help him to lift them up again. Right? So he's literally showing that it was lawful, and it was written in the law that you must help the animal. And so if it's for lawful to help an animal, and actually something you have to do, how much more is it lawful to help a man? And in Exodus 23, we actually see that you actually had to do this for not just for your brethren, but for an enemy's ox. If thou meet thine enemy's ox, or his ass go astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. If thou see his ass of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. You had to help the animal. And Jesus is saying, how much more is a human life than this animal's life? And so if it's legal to do this, then to help the animal, then it is lawful, legal to help the human. These laws were not to be set aside on the Sabbath. There is no prohibition from carrying out this law, just as there is no prohibition against circumcising a male child on the Sabbath or doing prophet's work. This wasn't considered work, the occupation, but rather the work of God, doing good. This is why Jesus specifically asked the Pharisees which one of them would not help a sheep or ox on the Sabbath. And he specifically says on the Sabbath. Then Jesus argued, how much better is the man? And Jesus actually states, behold, the fowl of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are you not much better than they? How much better are you than these animals? Yet you will help an animal on the Sabbath day, but you're saying that it's not right for me to help a human, a person, your brother, on the Sabbath day, to bring life back to a person on the Sabbath day. But the Pharisees had no answer to that question, because they knew that it was lawful to help the animal, even on the Sabbath day. And they knew that a man was worth more than the animal. So there is no way that they could have continued to accuse Jesus of what they accused him of. They had written so much into the law that they had put burdens onto the law, and they were making it out that things that were not prohibited, they were stopping from actually happening, such as looking after healing somebody on the Sabbath. But there was no prohibition against this. This was all their own doing in the traditions of their own oral law, or the burdens that they had put upon the law itself. Now, when we look at the account as recorded in Mark, we see that Jesus actually further highlighted their hypocrisy when he asked them. And he saith unto them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. Now, it is recorded in the account back in Matthew that they actually plotted to destroy him. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might to destroy him. This is after Jesus had healed on the Sabbath day. They're now plotting to destroy him on the Sabbath day. So while Jesus was doing good works upon the Sabbath day, and he says, is it lawful to do on the Sabbath day to do evil or to do good? So while Jesus was going about doing good on the Sabbath day, they were doing evil. They themselves were working evil because they were plotting to kill him. So that's why he's saying, is it lawful for me to save a life, to bring back somebody and to heal somebody, or is it lawful to kill? You're planning on killing me. You want to kill me. But you're thinking that what you're doing is perfectly legal and okay for you to do, but you're going to accuse me because I heal on the Sabbath day. Even though God, those that work for God and do God's work will always be allowed to do what is good. In a later discussion where we see that the Pharisees yet again tried to tempt him, Jesus was asked which commandment was the greatest in Matthew 22. And again, we see that they tried to tempt him. But when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him and saying, so tempting him again, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. One of those laws being, love thy neighbor as thyself. Loving God and loving your neighbor were the most important commands in all the law. All the rest of the law, the Sabbath, all of those laws back in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, everything hangs on those two. And in the account back in Mark, we find the same story. Jesus even stated to the Pharisees that the Pharisees actually stated, the one that asked him this question, that he had spoken the truth. Well, Master, thou hast said the truth, for there is one God, and there is none other but he. And to love him with all thy heart, with all thy understanding, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and to love his neighbor as himself, is more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. And this is the Pharisee saying this to Jesus, that loving your neighbor is worth more than whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. Paul states that love is the fulfilling of the law. Romans 13:10, love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Doing good to your neighbor, loving your neighbor, love fulfills the law. Therefore, was permissible, even on the Sabbath, because it was an act of love. And so rather than breaking the law, it fulfills the law. Doing good, regardless of when that good was done, will always harmonize with God's law. So, on another accusation against Jesus breaking the law, is that he told a man to carry his mat on the Sabbath after he had healed him. In John 5:8, Jesus saith unto him, Rise, take up thy bed and walk. And immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. So this is often used to show that Jesus actually told the man to pick up his bed on the Sabbath day. And this was Jesus telling the man to basically break the Sabbath law. And this again was after Jesus had healed the man. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, there at Jerusalem, by the sheep market, a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethsaida, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then was first into the pool, the troubling of the water, stepped in, and they were made whole of whatsoever disease they had. And a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. Now when Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been there a long time in that way, he saith unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? Now the impotent man answered him, saying, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool. But while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. So somebody got there before him, basically. Jesus saith unto him, Rise, take up thy bed and walk. So Jesus heals this man on the Sabbath. Now this story is quite a famous story of the troubling of the pool and the angel coming down, but we won't worry about that at this precise moment in time. We're just worrying about Jesus healing on the Sabbath, and he heals him and then tells him to pick up his bed and walk. So it is argued that this broke the law, as it was not lawful to carry a burden on the Sabbath day. And this is something that the Jews themselves stated. The Jews therefore said unto him, that was cured. It is the Sabbath day. It is not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. So you can't carry your bed because it's not lawful for you to do so. And then they asked, the Pharisees asked this man, who told you to do this? Who told you you were allowed to carry your bed? But again, we have to go back to Luke 11:46, where we see these grievous burdens being added to the law, where they were adding all of these extra things to the law. There is no prohibition about carrying a mat on the Sabbath day. This was added burden to the law. Now, some people will go to Jeremiah 17 in order to show that the burdens, you were not allowed to carry a burden. All right. And that's in Jeremiah 17. Thus saith the Lord unto me, Go and stand in the gate of the children of the people, whereby the kings of Judah came in, and by the which they go out, and in all the gates of Jerusalem, and say unto them, Hear ye the word of the Lord, ye kings of Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem that enter in by these gates. Thus saith the Lord, Take heed to yourselves, and bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it by the gates of Jerusalem, neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day. Neither do ye any work, but hallow ye the Sabbath day, as I commanded your fathers. But they obeyed not, neither inclined their ear, but made their neck stiff, that they might not hear nor receive instruction. So here it is being used, this passage gets used to say, well, this shows that burdens were not allowed to be carried on the Sabbath day. It clearly states in verse 21, Thus saith the Lord, Take heed to yourselves, and bear no burden on the Sabbath day. But this is actually explained in Nehemiah chapter 13, where Nehemiah himself refers back to this event. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said unto them, What evil thing is this that ye do, and profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus, and did not God bring all this evil upon us and upon this city? Yet ye bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. Now Nehemiah states that he condensed with the nobles of Judah contended with the nobles of Judah that they profaned the Sabbath. He then says that the fathers did this. They did the same, which God brought evil upon them, which is a reference back to the Jeremiah passage, where the fathers profaned the Sabbath and God brought evil upon them. But how did the fathers profane the Sabbath? Well, they profaned it by carrying burdens on the Sabbath, as we saw in Jeremiah. But now he says, Nehemiah is saying, did not your fathers do this? But what is Nehemiah referring to? Now we find that out in verse 15. In those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves, and lading asses, as also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. There dwelt men in Tyre also therein, which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah in Jerusalem. So what is being referenced here? It was to do with commerce. They were buying and selling on the Sabbath. The burdens, which are in reference here, are to things that were being carried into Jerusalem to be bought and sold on the Sabbath. This wasn't a reference to a prohibition of carrying a mat or any other kind of burden. This was a reference to buying and selling on the Sabbath day. And that's what they were doing. So in Nehemiah, they were buying and selling on the Sabbath day. And in the same manner, the fathers had done back in Jeremiah. So when we go back to Jeremiah, we have to read and understand it with the understanding of Nehemiah, which was that they were buying and selling and carrying burdens which were to do with commerce, buying and selling. Nothing to do with carrying a mat. Nehemiah then commands that the gates to Jerusalem be closed on the Sabbath, and that this trade should cease. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. So he's telling them to close the gates to Jerusalem on the Sabbath. So why? Why is he telling them that? And some of my servants set I at the gates, that there should be no burden be brought in to Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So the merchants and sellers of all kind of ware lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. Then I testified against them and said unto them, why lodge ye about the wall? If ye do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time forth they came no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should come and keep the gates to sanctify the Sabbath. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me accordingly to the greatness of thy mercy. This was about buying and selling on the Sabbath day. So the burden that was being carried were things to be bought and sold, not this man who was carrying a mat. This was just the Pharisees had created this extra burden upon the Sabbath, and it had literally nothing to do with carrying things about that you could carry. If he was carrying it to sell, that would be a different thing. Now, in fact, we can actually see where people were commanded to carry things on the Sabbath day. In 2 Kings chapter 11, and I won't read all of this, because it's quite a long passage, but it's up on the screen there. It's 2 Kings 11, verse 4 through 12. And what we'll see is that, and I'll just read parts of it. This is the thing that ye shall do. A third part of you that enter in on the Sabbath, so that's the first read there, shall be keepers of the watch of the king's house. Right. And then we go down to verse 10. And to the captains over hundreds did the priest give King David's spears and shields, that they were in the temple of the Lord. Right. And the guard stood every man with his weapons in his hand, round about the king, from the right corner of the temple to the left corner of the temple. So they were actually told to carry spears and shields on the Sabbath day, because carrying shields and spears was not carrying a burden. It was carrying a weapon that was required. And that was on the Sabbath day. So Jesus did not instruct the man to break the Sabbath by picking up his mat, because carrying a mat was not against the Sabbath law. I know that there has been quite a bit of conversation in the, and I do apologize that I haven't been following. So far, every time I think I got a question to stump LJ, he shows me the answer from the Bible. He knows the Bible very well. I'm quite positive that you will stump me, Tunji. There's no question about that. But I will find an answer, I'm sure. You might stump me with the question as you say it, but I'm sure that I will find it eventually. It will be there. The answer will be there. Now, we also get told of a story, and I'm not going to go into this story, but is quite a detailed story about the marching around Jericho when the walls of Jericho would fall. And this is in the book of Joshua. This is quite a longish story, but basically what happened was that God told the Israelites to march around Jericho for 7 days. So on that 7th day, God was specifically commanding them to do something. If they are going around 7 days, then one of those days is logically going to be the Sabbath day, because there are 7 days in a week, and one of those is the Sabbath day. So God was actually literally commanding them to do so on the Sabbath day. He was telling them to march around the city. Now, it also states in there that on the 7th day, right at the bottom, you might not be able to see it, but it's verse 15. And it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early about the dawning of the day and compassed the city after the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they compassed the city 7 times. And it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priests blew the trumpets. So the priests are on the 7th day, they are holding trumpets. So the priests are carrying trumpets. So they're allowed to carry the trumpets. So this shows that there is no stipulation, there is no prohibition against carrying things on the Sabbath day, on the 7th day. It is only specific things that were prohibited, and those burdens that were prohibited were things that were being bought and sold in Jericho. It has got nothing to do with carrying something. Who is the commander of the Lord's army in Joshua? Okay, we'll look into that one. We'll look into that one, Christy. No problem. But I'm going to now look at another example of Jesus breaking the Sabbath in Matthew 12:1. So at that time, Jesus went out on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. But he said unto them, Have you not read what David did when he was hungered, and they that were with him, how he entered into the house of God, and did eat the shewbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. Now, there's a lot of information in there, and we're going to break that down and show what is actually going on here. Now, this story is also found in Luke chapter 6. I won't read all of that, but it's also found in Mark chapter 2 as well. So this is found in all three of the synoptic gospels. And let me just bring my screen back up. Right. Okay. So this is found in all three of the synoptic gospels, but there's slightly different information in all three of them, and we're going to need all three in order to kind of figure out what's going on here. Now, here we see that it was the disciples that were eating. They were the ones plucking the corn and ate on the Sabbath day, and it was them that they were said that they were doing what was illegal. So at that time, Jesus went out on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered and began to pluck the corn. But the Pharisees saw it and said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful. All right. So here we see that it was the disciples here being accused of breaking the law, and not actually Jesus. And again, in the Luke one, and his disciples plucked the ears of corn and did eat. And certain of the Pharisees said unto them, Why do ye that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath days? And again, in the Mark passage, and his disciples began, and behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? So it's clear here that this wasn't actually Jesus. So even if the disciples had actually broken the Sabbath here, then this couldn't be shown that Jesus had broken the Sabbath, as some people actually try to show. It was the disciples that would have broken the Sabbath. But even though they were accused of breaking the Sabbath, I don't believe that they actually did. I think that what they did on the Sabbath was perfectly legal to do so. Now, Jesus, in his rebuttal to the Pharisees, referred to the story of David and his men eating the shewbread. And he said what was not legal for them to eat, neither for they which were with him. So it wasn't lawful for David or the men that were with him, because the shewbread was only for the priests. It wasn't just for anybody that could eat it. And we find this back in Exodus 23. The law revolving around the shewbread. And I won't again read all of this, maybe because it's quite long, but it is quite important that we read, I suppose. Thou shalt also make a table of shittim wood. 2 cubits shall be the length thereof, and a cubit and breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, and make thereunto a crown of gold round about. And thou shalt make unto it a border of an hand breadth round about. And thou shalt make a golden crown to the border thereof round about. And thou shalt make for it 4 rings. And so this is quite a detailed passage, but it's actually verse 30 really that's of our interest here. And thou shalt set upon the table shewbread before me always. Okay, so there had to be shewbread before the Lord at all times. Now, the shewbread was only for the sons of Aaron in Leviticus 24:5. And thou shalt take fine flour, and this is showing how to make it, and bake 12 cakes thereof. 2/10 deals shall be in 1 cake, and thou shalt set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, upon the pure table before the Lord. And thou shalt put pure frankincense upon each row. And it may be on the bread for a memorial, even an offering made by fire unto the Lord. Every Sabbath he shall set it in order before the Lord continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. And it shall be Aaron's and his sons, and they shall eat it in the holy place. For it is the most holy unto him of the offerings of the Lord made by fire by a perpetual statute. So this was only for Aaron and his sons. This was not for just anybody to actually eat, but this was. But David was given this, and his men were given this bread to eat. But it wasn't lawful for anybody else to actually eat this. However, we see that David and his men were given that bread to eat when they fled from King Saul, who sought to kill him. They were hungered because they were fleeing from King Saul. And this we find back in 1 Samuel 21. Then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech, the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of thy business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. And the priest answered David and said, There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread. So this is referring to that bread that he wasn't allowed to actually give, that David wasn't allowed. If the young men have kept themselves at least from women. And David answered the priest and said unto him, Of a truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out. And the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, though it were sacrificed this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread but the shewbread that was taken from before the Lord to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained from the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. And David said unto Ahimelech, And is there not here under thine hand spear or sword? So what we see here is that this bread was given to David. Now, Jesus used this account of David and the shewbread to highlight the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. the Pharisees had not condemned David or the priests for doing what was actually unlawful to do when David and his men were in need of food. This was in fact an act of mercy towards David by Amalek the priest. But they were now condemning the disciples even though they were hungered. But they didn't condemn David or the priests when David was hungered and he ate bread that was not lawful for him to do or to eat. But David ate that bread. So Jesus was showing that this was an act of mercy that Amalek, the priest, gave David, it wasn't legal, but rather than their sacrifice, which are legal, it is more preferable. It was an act of mercy. It was kindness and humanity. And that is required above the law, as we've already seen, that people are more important than the law. The law hangs on the two commands of loving your neighbor, which is always superior, and love always fulfills the law. So when you see somebody hungered, when you see somebody in need, that law of loving your neighbor will always supersede any other law. Jesus then highlighted the fact that the priests profaned the Sabbath, yet were blameless to do so. Matthew 12:5. So, or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Now we already know that this was back to the priests being allowed to do the circumcision and they were allowed to do the sacrifices on the Sabbath. But Jesus then says that there is one in this place is greater than the temple. Now, this bread, which was in the temple, which was for God, which was for the priests and the priests only, was special bread, only lawful for them. But Jesus now says that there is one in the place greater than the temple. Jesus is that one who is greater than the temple. But now he says, but if you had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would have not condemned the guiltless. So the priests who were allowed to do the sacrifices on the Sabbath, right? Jesus is saying, I would rather mercy and not sacrifice. But the priests are allowed to do sacrifice. But what about mercy? So when somebody is hungry, what about mercy? And it was lawful in order for the priest Amalek, in order to be able to give David this bread, which was not lawful, because it was an act of mercy, and Jesus would rather mercy than sacrifice. So how more important again is the mercy than the sacrifice? And if the priests are allowed to offer sacrifice, how much more are we allowed to have mercy on someone? And this was actually a reference back to Hosea 6:6 back in the Old Testament. For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. So we see all of these burnt offerings, all of these things that were under the law, the sacrifices, and God didn't want them. He wanted people to love one another, And that was meant to go and supersede all of these other laws. When somebody is in need, you help them. When somebody is hungry, you give them food. When somebody is not well, you heal them, regardless of when that is. It doesn't matter what day that was, you help the people in need. You'll help an animal, help a human. You'll offer a sacrifice, give mercy. If it's legal to offer sacrifice, it's legal to give mercy. If it's legal to heal an animal, you help a human. And that's the whole point of this, is how much more important is somebody that is in need of help than your sacrifice, than your bread, than your carrying of burdens. None of this supersedes God's law of loving one another. And that fulfills the law. When you love, you fulfill the law. And so everything that you do in love will always be allowed under the law. Okay, Dennis. Good night, Dennis. Thank you very much for being here. I do appreciate. It's obviously late for you again. So, anyway, so we've, regardless of this, even regardless of whether or not this was lawful to do so in the eyes of the mercy and the law, legally, they were allowed to do what they were doing anyway. They were allowed to pluck the corn on the Sabbath and eat. There was no law against it. In fact, there are specific laws that would allow that. Right. So let's have a look at this story again. In Matthew, we get, at the time Jesus went out on the Sabbath day through the corn. Right, so we're going through the corn. Right, there's lots of information that is needed to be taken again from this. This was on the Sabbath day. They were going through the corn, and his disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck the corn and to eat. And the Pharisees said, "This is not lawful." But when we look at this in the passage in Luke, in the recording in Luke, it clearly states, "And it came to pass on the second Sabbath after the first." What is that in reference to? What is the second Sabbath after the first? Well, there are only two times when you get two Sabbaths in the law. One is when you get a weekly Sabbath, and then you get a high Sabbath. That's one time when you get two Sabbaths referenced. This one is the second Sabbath after the first. But we also get specifically the second Sabbath after the first when it comes to Exodus 12:16. This was specifically the 7 days of the feast of the Passover, of unleavened bread. All right. In Exodus 12:6, and in the first day there shall be an holy convocation. So this is on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, there is a Sabbath. It's a holy convocation. This is a high Sabbath. And in the seventh day, there shall be a holy convocation. So in this, there are two Sabbaths in that week. The first day of the unleavened bread, and on the seventh day of unleavened bread. To you, no manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat. That only may be done of you. So no work was to be done on these two Sabbaths, on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, apart from what was allowed to be done that a man must eat. And what were they doing? They were eating on the Sabbath, the second Sabbath after the first. This is a reference back to this. All right, and in full context, I'm not going to read this, but this is the full context of the Passover instigated in Exodus 12. This is the first Passover. This is the and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, right? And that there would be 2 Sabbaths, one after the other, one on the first day and one on the seventh day, and they were allowed to do nothing but what they were able to eat, and allowed them to eat. Oh, Chrissy, I think she's gone, or maybe she's still here, but she might be going. You're welcome, Chrissy. Hopefully you've this has been kind of informative for you. And I'm trying to go as deep as I can with this, in order to give you the correct understanding of what is actually going on. So they were allowed to eat, and that's what they were doing back in that passage in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now, also, there's another specific law, Deuteronomy 23:25. When thou comest into the standing corn of thy neighbor. Or when we go back to the story in Luke, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what are they doing? They're going through the cornfields. So when you come into the standing corn of thy neighbor, then thou mayest pluck the ears with thine hand, but thou shalt not move a sickle unto thy neighbor's standing corn. So when you came into your neighbor's cornfield, you are allowed to pluck the corn. So we now have that they were allowed to eat on that Sabbath. It was not against the law in order to eat on the Sabbath, and to work in order to get that food. The work would be plucking the corn. That would be classified as harvesting, but not if you are doing so to eat. If you are doing it so to harvest your field and then store up the corn, that would be classified as work. But if you were just picking the corn in order to eat it, so you could have food, that wouldn't be classified as work, and it was allowed to be done. What you can do so that you can eat. When thou comest into the standing corn of thy neighbor, then thou mayest pluck the corn, pluck the ears with thine hand, but thou shalt not move a sickle unto thy neighbor's standing corn. So you were allowed to pluck your neighbor's corn to satisfy your food. That was legal. You could go into the neighbor's field and actually take some a ear of corn in order to stop yourself from being hungry. You just couldn't go in with a sickle and cultivate your neighbor's field and take all the corn, but you were allowed to pick what you could with your hands in order to eat. And what do we find in Luke 6:1? And it came to pass on the second Sabbath after the first, that he went through the corn fields, and his disciples plucked the ears of corn and did eat, rubbing them in their hands. So they were picking the corn with their hands, which was perfectly legal to do on this Sabbath day, because it was the second Sabbath day, which they were legally allowed to do the work which allowed them to eat. But they were also plucking ears of corn, which they were allowed to do as long as they only used their hands. So the Pharisees' charge against the disciples, what they were doing, that it was not legal for them to do, was in fact a false accusation. They had no right to accuse them of breaking the Sabbath, because what they did was perfectly legal and went along with the law. So even if we ignore all the other information that I actually presented, we don't have the disciples breaking the law anyway. In fact, they perfectly followed that law, the laws that allowed them to eat from their neighbor's field, their corn, as long as they picked it from with their hands, and they did so on that Sabbath day, which was the second Sabbath day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where they were allowed to eat food. So there literally is no breaking of any law in any of these passages that are used against Jesus in order for his breaking of the Sabbath. Now, we do have one other kind of accusation, and I haven't done this. So how would the Pharisees not know this? Well, because they didn't know the law. It's as simple as that. They knew the burdens of the law, and they knew the extra things that were put onto the law. But Jesus actually stated that you don't know the word of God. You don't even know what the law actually states. But it's there it's there in scripture. You know, I'm not trying to manipulate that scripture. I'm literally showing the scriptures that allowed the disciples to do what they did. We don't get what their interpretation of that law was. What we know is that what they were understanding is that it was illegal to literally do anything, or it was, you know, I say illegal, but you know, it was against their law on the Sabbath today to do anything at all. You weren't allowed to carry. I mean, if you go to the Jews now today, the Jews now today, I mean, they're not even allowed to turn lights on. They have to unplug their fridge because it could mean that the fridge could go off and come back on, and it would cause a spark, and that would be creating a fire on the Sabbath. They've burdened that law, the Sabbath law. You're not allowed to. Some of the things that you're not allowed to do, I can't even remember all of them. That some of the things but you're not allowed to light fires because that's kindling a fire. So I think that they only have candlelight, and that has to be all lit before the Sabbath day, because they can't light candles on the Sabbath day. They don't have lights. They're not allowed to use gas cookers and stuff like that. It's crazy, the interpretation of how they've burdened that Sabbath law today is ridiculously is silly. They have to unplug all different all their appliances. They have to make all of their food the day before. So it's no different than what the Pharisees were doing back then. Right? They were creating their own interpretation of this law, and they're still doing it today. And they've completely misunderstood the burdens that you weren't allowed to carry. But the Bible explains what the burdens are. You're not allowed to buy and sell, and if you're trying to do commerce on the Sabbath day, then you are breaking the Sabbath law. If you actually call yourself being under if you're still under the Sabbath law today, as the Jews think that they are. But if you they have completely misunderstood what a burden actually was, because Nehemiah explains what the burden is. You don't need to try and figure out what that burden was. So yeah, I mean, there is the incident back in Exodus where the man goes out into on the Sabbath day, and goes out and picks up sticks, and then he's brought to the to Moses, and they ask basically what should we do with this man who was caught picking up sticks, and he's put to death. But it wasn't the picking up sticks that was actually what he was stoned for, although he did pick up sticks on the Sabbath day. The command at that time, because this is actually before the law was given to Moses and the Israelites in Exodus at Mount Sinai. This was back in Exodus 16 when they were given the law, given the Sabbath day, and it was different than what was given in the law. The command in then was to stay inside their tents. Right? And so there was no law about not going and picking up sticks on the Sabbath day. It was the law at that time, that command, because this was a command of God, was that on the Sabbath day, the day before the Sabbath day, you would pick up you would go out and pick up 2 lots of manna, and then you would stay in your tent on the Sabbath day. You weren't to go out. And that's what, so the man broke the command by going out of his tent on the Sabbath day. That was the command, to stay in the tent. So it wasn't the carrying of the burden at that particular time, because there wasn't a command against that at that time. It was the command to stay in your tent, and that was the reason why he broke the commandment by coming out of his tent. But yeah, so not to get off topic, but it's that why Paul changed things. The law was too hard to keep, and only Jesus could actually do it. Well, yeah, the law was only meant to be given until the schoolmaster would come. The law was meant to point towards Jesus, and then after Jesus came, that was it, basically, and the law was no more. David Bracheto, they were angry because Jesus healed the woman bent over, but he used their understanding of letting their animals loose for water to show how he was justified for healing on the Sabbath. Yeah, he was perfectly justified to... all this time I thought it was about the sticks. Yeah, it's not. It seems like it is about the sticks, but in fact, actually, let's go back. Let me see if I can add to share screen. Let's go back and just see if so it's in Exodus 16. I can't remember if the actual stoning happens in Exodus 16 or in 17. Let's have a look. The Sabbath observed. So where is it? That right, yeah, it might be here. And it came to pass that on the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man, and the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses, and he said unto them, This is what the Lord hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which ye will bake today, and seethe that ye will seethe, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. And they laid it up to the morning, and Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. Because what had happened was they were going out every day to collect this manna, and what they didn't eat that day, the next day, because this was to show them that they had to rely on God every day. Right, every day. So in the manna from heaven, he was giving them literally every day, and they were not to store this manna up. And if they did, in the morning, what they didn't eat, the bread would be it would have worms in it, and it would have gone off. Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto Moses, but some of them left it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank. So you have to go back through this whole passage. So basically, the manna was given to them from heaven, and they would go out every day and they would collect this manna. And every day they would eat this manna from heaven. And so that was the reliance on God, that every day God was going to feed them this bread. And if they kept it because they were worried about the next day whether they were going to get more manna, that bread had worms in it, and Moses was wroth with them, and they gathered it every morning, every man according to his eating, and when the sun waxed hot, it melted. So they collected it in the morning, and then it all went, so they and it disappeared from outside, and they couldn't collect it again. But when it came to the sixth day, they were told to gather twice as much bread, 2 omers, for a man, and all the rulers of the congregation. And he said, and this is what he was saying. So, and Moses said, Eat that today, for today is the Sabbath unto the Lord. Today ye shall not find it in the field. So you won't find this bread. They have to get 2 days worth on the Sabbath. And it came to pass that on the Sabbath, on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man. Right. On 6 days shall you gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. All right. And he also states in verse 24, and they laid it up till the morning, as Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. But only on the Sabbath day, was this bread laid up, and that they collected two lots on the 6th day, and only on the Sabbath day, did that bread that remained over from the night before, that bread didn't stink and there wasn't a worm in it. Every other day, if they didn't trust that the Lord was going to feed them bread the next day and they collected more, that bread had worms in it and had gone off. And basically, so this was, you're going to rely on me every single day. And if you don't rely on me, then you're going to get these worms. And I presume that it would just be in the morning when they would awake. It would happen overnight if they weren't if they'd collected more. And it came to pass that that went some of the people on the 7th day to gather, and they found none. And the Lord said unto Moses, How long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? See that ye, the Lord, have given ye the Sabbath. Therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. All right, so he's now warned them. These people have gone out Yeah. So assuming Sunday the Sabbath. So in the understanding of the Jews, the Friday evening to Saturday evening of what we know is the Sabbath. So they would go out Thursday, but yeah, if you were assuming Sunday was the Sabbath, then Saturday they were told to go and get 2 days worth. So they would go out and get 2 days on Saturday, and that would last them Sunday as well. But God had warned them, he said to them, how long? So some had gone out, and it came to pass that there were some that went out on the seventh day. But then the Lord said unto Moses, how long refuseth ye to keep my commandments and my laws? How long are you going to do this? All right. Let me bring this up bigger. Why are you doing this? This is not what I have commanded you to do. Let me see if I can bring that a bit bigger. And then it is. Oh, where is it? Where's the man that? Huh, I can't remember where this is. I might have actually got this this the wrong way round actually. Where does the man stoned for? I know that it's not for carrying. It's numbers. Yeah, it is numbers. This was actually after the law was given. So no. I might have had this wrong. I thought that this was. It's not because of the gathering of the sticks. It's not just the gathering of the sticks. I had this before, but I am wrong. I've got that mixed up. Numbers 15. Yeah, this is actually so. They were told to stay in their tents, but this is still in the wilderness. This isn't when they haven't yet come into the promised land. This is in the wilderness, and this. This I know I knew that I know the answer, but I've got when this actually happened mixed up. So the Sabbath breaker, there it is in Numbers. So right, what we know is that it isn't until they passed over, they're given the law of the Sabbath, right, and they're given the whole law at Mount Sinai, but they don't have to follow the law until they get into the promised land. That's the point, is that they're not under the law. They don't keep the law until the promised land. But so they're still under that Exodus 16 understanding of the Sabbath, where they're still under this manna bread. They haven't yet gone into the promised land, which is where they would then get their own land, and then they would be given the food, and they would be able to produce their own food in the land. They're still under the manna of the Lord. That's right. It's not that I've got it incorrect. I've just got when it happened incorrect. So at this precise moment in time, in Exodus 21, they are still under the Sabbath understanding of Exodus 16. Although the Sabbath, to the law to keep the Sabbath has been given to them at Mount Sinai, that is part of the law that they would have to keep once they enter into the promised land. And I can show you that they didn't keep the law until they came into the promised land. So at this precise moment in time, the Sabbath breaker is he's gone out to gather sticks on the Sabbath, but they were still instructed to stay within the congregation. They weren't to go out on their own and on the Sabbath day. This was prohibited back in Exodus 16. And so it's because he was a Sabbath, it's not the picking up the sticks, the carrying a burden that this man is stoned for. It is the breaking of the commandment of not going out on the Sabbath day. And that's the point in Exodus 21, in Numbers 15. Sorry, why have I got Exodus 21 up still? Because I thought I do apologize. I thought I actually had Numbers 15 up. Let me bring that up. No. So this is the passage. So it hasn't got to do with the gathering of the sticks, which is what people think that it has. It's the going out, because he's broken the Sabbath, right? By going out, and he's not relying on the Lord. Now, we don't know why he was gathering sticks. We don't even know what the sticks actually were for. Maybe to go and make some food, to make a fire, to make food. We don't know. But it isn't specifically down to the gathering of the sticks that he was actually stoned for. But he was put to death, and it was for breaking the Sabbath. But it's the breaking of the Sabbath of Exodus 16, not breaking the Sabbath of the law of Moses, which hadn't yet come into place. And we know that because in Deuteronomy, so we know that they're not keeping the law yet, because there were certain things that they couldn't do yet. And so this is as they come, that just before they go into the land, and it says, and it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the word of the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day. Right, this day when you go over, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all the nations of the earth. So he broke the God's law. But you have to understand is that what people fail to understand is that when we're talking about commandments, when we're talking about God's law, automatically they assume that we are referring to the 10 Commandments, and we are talking about the law given through Moses at Sinai. But that's incorrect, because that's one law. That's one of God's laws that he made as a covenant with Israel. He doesn't make that with other people. He makes this with Israel, and Israel alone. Okay, and other people could come into Israel. They could become part of Israel, but they had to become part of Israel. They had to come out of the nation that they were living in and being that part, and they had to come and live as part of Israel and become part of Israel. And what we have to understand is that it's incorrect to understand that God only gave one law. God only gave the Israelites that law, didn't give anybody else that law. But when we go to Adam and Eve, they didn't have the law of Moses, but they did have commandments. And what were their commandments? That you cannot eat of the tree of the fruit of you can't eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that they were also to multiply, and that they were given of the herbs to eat. That was the commandments. Don't eat of this tree. Go and multiply, and all the food that you can eat is is all the other trees and the fruit, but you're not allowed to eat from this one tree. All right, that's the tree that you're not allowed to eat from, but every other tree you can eat, and all the plants you can eat from. That was the law that was given to Adam and Eve, and that's why when Adam ate from the tree, he sinned, because he went against the commandment of God. But we don't have that commandment. That's not a commandment for us. We don't have a commandment not to eat from this tree, because it's already been done, and that command is no more. That was for Adam and for Eve, but that's not for us. And then you have the law given to Noah, and we see that there was altars given to Noah, and in fact Noah is specifically told after the law, after the flood. Let me see if I can. Let me bring this up. So in Genesis 8 or 9. Okay, so there's a new covenant. This covenant is made to Abraham, to Noah, and see, in this one there is no law in. This is why when Cain killed Abel, Cain wasn't killed, because the law for shedding blood, only shedding a man's blood, only came in after the flood. Whosoever sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God man he made. And Noah was given this, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply. So this is the covenant that he's making with Noah, and replenish the earth. And fear of you and dread shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. And into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, shall be food for you. Even as the green herb I have given you in all these things. All right, so Noah is given the food of being allowed to eat the animals. But this wasn't what was given to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were given and every beast of the earth, and every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for food. So all the beasts and all the people, right, their food was the green herb. That was it. That was what was eaten. So see, God said, behold, I have given you, this is to Adam, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be meat, which is food. To you, this is going to be food. But to Noah, he was allowed to eat the animals. This is a change. So this is a change of commandment, a change of covenant, not the covenant with Adam. And that's why the law, every law that God states to someone, is the law given to them. But that does not necessitate that law is for others. So in each covenant that God brings in, things change, and certain things are allowed that weren't allowed in maybe in other covenants. So Noah is allowed to eat the animals, whereas Adam and Eve were not given the animals to eat. And then we also have the covenant of Abraham as well. So Abraham has a different covenant than that with Noah, and that's why God says. So we see with Abraham, and I should do a video on this as well. But Abraham married his sister. His sister, Sarah, was from his father, but not from his mother. So she was his half sister. But under the law, that is illegal. That's not part of the law that was given to Israel. So Abraham, had he been under the law of Israel, would have broken the law. But God says that Abraham was righteous and that he had kept all my laws and commandments. Well, he kept the laws and the commandments that were given to him. What were the laws and commandments that were given to him? The laws that were given to Abraham was leave your hometown and go to Canaan. And Abraham followed that. That was the command that was given to him. So he kept that. What was the other command? Sacrifice your son. Abraham was going to do that. But God obviously intervened and stopped that. But Abraham was following God, the commandments that God was given him. He wasn't given, thou shalt not sleep with your sister. That's given in Leviticus or Exodus. That's when that law comes in. That's why Adam and Eve and their children, there was no command against the incest at that time. In fact, actually, it was a necessity. If we say that Adam and Eve were the first two people, it was a necessity that there was incest, that brothers and sisters would mate and produce. That was just necessity. You can't have a population where it is against the rules or against the laws to sleep with your sister if that's the only way that you can procreate, because that's all that there is. Noah was not given that law, and we see that there was incest relationships going on there. And Lot and his daughters had they had sex. They produced two nations, Lot and his daughters, but that wasn't against the law at the time because the law hadn't yet been given. So we have different covenants with different people with different laws, and that's why we have the new covenant, and that's why Hebrew Israelites often get caught up with this about you must keep the laws and the commandments, because it says in Revelation that the ones which will inherit the kingdom are those that are keeping the commandments of God. But automatically they're going to say, right, well, these are the 10 commandments, but they're not. They're the commandments of the new covenant, because we're no longer under the covenant of the old covenant. Jeremiah 31 tells us. Let's bring up Jeremiah 31. So in Jeremiah 31, we see that, hopefully you can see that, Jeremiah 31:31. Behold, The days cometh, said the Lord, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them out, took them by the hand and brought them out of the land of Egypt. So this is referring back to the first covenant, right? When he came out of Egypt, he gave them the law and this new covenant. But this new covenant, there will come a time when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, not according to that covenant that I made with their fathers when I took them out of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was an husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with them. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. So he's going to write this new law rather than on the tables of stone. He's going to write it on their inward parts and on their hearts. It's going to be an inward thing. It's a heart thing, rather than. This is why I say about following God. He wants us to do not what is written down on a piece of paper, because there's a law that says you must not kill. It's in the heart. The heart says do not kill, so you don't kill. So this is going to be a new command. This is not going to be the same as what they were following from the old covenant. And that's why Jesus says, a new command I give you. All right. And in 1 John, so in 1 John, so people, the Israelites will often go to 1 John 2. Brethren, no, where is it? Command. Right there. And hereby we do know that we in him, if we keep his commandments. He that saith, I know him not, and not keepeth commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. All right. But if we go to 1 John 3, we get literally told the new command. And this is his command, his commandment, that we should believe on the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another as he gave us commandment, as Jesus gave us the commandment. What was the commandment that Jesus gave? A new commandment I give you. Where is that? In John 13:34. What's the new commandment that Jesus gives? John 13:34. A new commandment I give to you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this, all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. The whole thing, it's all about love. It's all about the whole Sabbath, the whole law. It's all about love, loving your neighbor, loving your people. When you love, you fulfill the law, and that's what Jesus goes through, and that's what all of those Sabbath, the breaking of the Sabbath and everything is all about. Jesus saying, it's all about love. When you love, you fulfill the law, and that's how Jesus doesn't break the Sabbath. And these are the new commandments. that you love one another. And so when we go back to the old covenant, that's why when we say that we're not under that law anymore, we're under a different law where it's of the heart, where you the law is being replaced from the stony tablets. From the stony tablets. Let me bring that one up as well. It's actually in Jeremiah 31, and actually Ezekiel 36 as well. So let's go to both of those. Let's have a look at both of those. So back to Jeremiah 31. Where are we? Why can't I find that? There it is. So back to Jeremiah 31. And in 33, he literally states, behold, and we've already done this, but this shall be the covenant that after those days I will put my law in their inward parts and write in their hearts. But that's not the verse that I wanted. It should be Ezekiel 36, maybe. I thought it might be in the New Testament. 36:26. Oh yeah, okay. A new heart also I will give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart. This is the stony heart. This is the law written on stone out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. So he's going to replace that stony heart, the law, which was written on stone, and he's going to write a new law about love on the heart. That's the new law. He's going to take away that stony heart that only followed the law, and he's going to put a new heart in us that is fleshly heart, and that's where he's going to write all his laws and the commandments. And the laws and the commandments, even the old covenant, was fulfilled when you love. When you love someone, Jesus says that the loving God, following him, and loving your neighbor, those are the two commandments of all the law. All these 613 laws, those are the two. And if you love, you fulfill. You fulfill all the law. You don't need the law of sacrifice, because if you love, you don't do the evil things, and then you don't need to sacrifice. So you fulfill the law through love. And then in the new covenant, in the new law, that's why you get this this new covenant through Jesus, and it's a better law. It's a better covenant with God. Do you think they needed God to make a commandment to know not to do incest? I know the Bible doesn't make that assertion, but I think that there were, when before the fall, there were, if you believe that there was one Adam and Eve, there was just one family, Adam and Eve. Before the fall, it was just Adam and Eve, and their line was perfect. They were perfect. They were made in the image of God. And so there was nothing, no blemishes in them. So I believe that probably incest, we know today that incest causes degenerate genes, and it can cause problems if you have close you have children with close relatives. We know that, but I don't think that was probably an issue at the beginning when the genes were pure. But as they went on, and people were sinning, and they were not living right, and the genes degenerated, and then by the time the Israelites became, and it may very well have been before that as well, that they were causing problems through this, through having close sexual relations with relatives. But Abraham did. Abraham had that with his sister, but it's not a huge amount of time after the flood. But yeah, I think that God had to install that because maybe because he'd only planned it for a certain amount of time in order to populate the world, and then it was meant to that was then meant to stop. And he had always planned on bringing this or it was purely down to the genes so corrupted that it was producing bad children, and so he brought that in to obviously stop that. I'm not sure exactly the reason why he introduced it at the time that he introduced it, but I would suggest that it would probably be one of those two reasons why he would have brought in that incest law. But obviously today it is considered to be an evil thing, a bad thing, probably normally mostly down to the fact of the genes and the degenerate genes of what it produces. There was no other choice. Well, there was no other choice in order to produce the children of Adam and Eve and the children, and then the future generations. There was certainly no choice about that, unless God had wanted to create multiple people at that time. He chose not to do that. He chose to produce through one family. That was the way that God chose to do. But yeah, they had to do it. They literally just had to produce in that way. That was the way that. But I do think that it was probably something that God was going to stop at some point anyway. It was always probably in the plan that he would introduce that and stop that from continuing on. But yeah, I mean, even today, we today say that incest is wrong, but I think in England, even first cousins can marry. In England, I'm pretty sure that first cousins, definitely second cousins can, but I think first cousins can get married. So it's not that far away from blood relatives in order to that can still get married in England legally. I'm pretty sure it's first cousins that can get married. So yeah, when it comes to that, the incest thing it's an interesting topic of why God actually produced that way and had incest at the beginning, and then obviously he had incest again with Noah. There were obviously a few more people there. There were 8 people that were then able to produce. So you do have cousins and stuff there, and nephews and nieces, rather than just, brothers and sisters. But it is, again, there was a bottleneck, and it started off with them. But it is interesting why God did that. Incest is practiced all over throughout time. I think that many of the leaders and stuff, that they would mate with really close kin in order to keep that, the lineage very tight. The royal lines and stuff that had to be very, very tight, and so they would marry into their own kind of really close family, and produce from that, in order for power, basically, to keep their lineage, the power in their own lineage. But I'm not a master person on that type of thing. Yeah, it's the way of the keeping the power within the family. I'm sure that you, on that side of it, you'll know a lot more than what I do. I'm not really studied. I know that was what people did, and in fact still do. But even down to like the British royal family, it's very close within a lot of the relationships that go on within that in the family, of people marrying very, very closely, or to keep that, or it has been in the past, and I'm not so sure that right now it's as close, but it is close. So okay. There was a question that I know that you asked, Tongji. That I don't know if I did answer during my study, to do with the Sabbath, to do with the casting out of the money changers, and I did notice it, and okay, yeah, there it was turning the money changers' tables over out of anger a sin. For everyone else, it probably would be considered a sin, and they would repent. But there isn't a law that out of anger, because they were breaking the law, and Jesus was casting them out. And so I've gone through why Jesus was casting them out, but we have to assert that Jesus was doing this through some kind of anger, and that would become a sin. But there's no law against that. In fact, actually, Jesus says, if you are angry with your brother without cause, you're in danger of hellfire. But Jesus had cause, and so it was righteous anger. So it wasn't the fact that he was that they were breaking the law, and so Jesus, it's not special pleading for him, because he had reason in order to be angry with what they were doing. It's without cause, and that's where it states that you cannot be so trespassing against someone's property. Well, they were actually trespassing within the temple again. So while he wasn't destroying them, the animals or the people, he was evicting them. So it's not they weren't allowed in the temple to be selling what they were selling. That was the issue, and so Jesus was casting them out. So that was in the temple, so it wasn't their property in the temple. They brought it into the temple, but what was in the temples is God's. So even if he destroyed it, it becomes God's inside of his house. It is God's. But I don't believe that. I don't think that Jesus went around breaking everything. He just he overturned and stopped them from doing the work that they were doing, the produce, the commerce that they were doing on in the temple. So I believe that that's what he actually did, and cast them out. So I don't think that he injured the animals, killed the animals, or hurt them or their property, but obviously stopping them from being able to carry out the work that they were doing and selling inside of the temple. But inside the temple, they didn't have the legal right in order to carry out the work that they were doing. The temple is for God's work, and not for them to be buying and selling sacrifices. That should have been done outside the temple, and it was at the wrong time anyway. It wasn't part of the Passover, so that's why I believe that what he did was not sinful, and actually was righteous anger in order to be able to do that. And when we see God throughout the Old Testament, he has righteous anger. From the text, we don't know. What we do know is that he states that you are profaning, you're making it a den of. So we don't know. We don't know if he had actually asked them to leave, but technically there wouldn't have been a requirement to ask them to leave, because they should not have been there in the first place. They were going against God's law and against his house, and so shouldn't have actually been there in the first place, and shouldn't have been allowed in there. The priests should have stopped them from going in. They shouldn't have actually been allowed to be in selling at all. And it is an anger, but it is a righteous anger in the fact that they were breaking the law, and that, like I say, there is law that where Jesus literally states and refers to the law that you cannot be angry with your with somebody unless you have cause to do so. So it's not just literally you can't be angry with somebody. It's you have to have just cause, and the just cause was that they were turning the house of God into a temple of devils, and that was it basically. Okay, so I'm going to finish there because it's now 20 past 11. Unless Tongji, you have any other questions regarding to this specific study. Hopefully I've been able to kind of answer the question to the best that I can answer it, using the scriptures to be able to obviously support what I've stated. But obviously if you've got any other questions that you have, I'm glad that you've learned, and that's obviously the point of why I tried to do this one for you, is just to give you some you whether you agree, whether you think that there might be more to it, and like maybe I'm not quite right in a certain point, but maybe it will give you some kind of understanding of what was going on, and at least make you think, well, okay, maybe it's not quite as I thought. Maybe you haven't explained it in a. There are some other issues that I still have, and maybe there are, and maybe one day you'll dive back into the Bible and you'll go and find those little things that I haven't quite addressed in giving you a full answer that you might have that you maybe needed. But hopefully I have been able to answer it in a way that, you know, ceases any other kind of questions that you might have regarding why Jesus cast out these money changers. And like I say, I think that there is a spiritual lesson in there, that these sacrifices were out of the temple. There is no more sacrifices in the temple. The one that is greater than the temple is here, and Jesus is now that sacrifice. And so symbolically, those being cast out of the temple, no longer are we required to offer sin sacrifices. Jesus is that sin sacrifice, and he wants mercy over sacrifice. And then we also have all of those other spiritual meanings of, you know, the love fulfills the law, and all of this kind of thing that I've gone into today. But I am going to finish there. Thank you very much for joining me. Everybody that has been watch this live, watching it on repeat. I do appreciate every single one of you that watches my video. Thank you very much. And I will see you on my next video. Hopefully it will be probably Friday. I shall do another one, but it might be Sunday, but hopefully I'll do one on Friday. And not quite sure what I'm going to do it on. Probably maybe Original Sin, but I want to mix things up a little bit, rather than just doing one particular subject all the time, because we covered this. We covered the Catholic Mary a fair bit. Maybe I'll go off onto something else, and then come back to the Original Sin at another time. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Please give it a thumbs up if you haven't already. Please subscribe, and you'll be able to be kept up to date with future videos. And I'll look forward to seeing you on my next video. Thank you very much.